My name is Rachel Lawson, and the day my life shattered wasn't the day my husband died. It was the moment I realized my family would rather protect their schedules than protect me. After a grueling 32-hour journey from Melbourne back to Denver, my eyes burned from sleeplessness, my body numb from grief and recycled airplane air. I had just buried Daniel, my husband, my partner of 12 years on the other side of the world. The funeral had been small, surrounded by strangers who knew him only from work, because no one from home had made the trip. I told myself that was because it was too expensive, too last minute. But on that cold February afternoon, as I stepped off the plane, I still believed they would be there for me now. So in the family group chat, I typed, "Flight lands at 5:00 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" My hands trembled, not from fear, but from that desperate, aching hope that this time they'd choose me. The 3 dots blinked on my screen. My brother Mark replied first, "Busy tonight. Try Uber." A minute later, my mother chimed in, "Why didn't you plan better?" I read their messages twice, my mind refusing to accept the simplicity of their dismissal. I typed back, "No worries," because that's what I'd been trained to do since childhood, make their comfort more important than my pain. Inside, I collapsed. I didn't know that in less than 24 hours, strangers across Colorado would be hearing my story on the evening news, shaking their heads in disbelief. I didn't know this moment would be the crack that finally split open years of silent endurance. All I knew as I sat in that stiff airport seat waiting for my luggage was that the one thing I had counted on a soft place to land had never actually existed. And before I go on, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Have you ever been left standing alone when you needed someone most? If you've ever found yourself in that kind of moment, leave a like and stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. I took a deep breath and looked around the terminal. People were hugging loved ones, kids were running into open arms. Even strangers were helping each other wrestle heavy bags off the carousel. I turned my gaze back to my phone, its black screen reflecting my hollow expression. That was the moment I decided not to cry, not yet. Crying would come later, but for now, I needed to move forward. So I dragged my suitcase toward the exit, telling myself I could endure one more Uber ride alone. What I didn't realize was that this wasn't just another lonely drive. It was the first step in a series of blows that would strip away every illusion I'd had about my family, and force me to decide whether blood really was thicker than water. Before everything unraveled, my life with Daniel was the kind people frame in photo collages, the kind strangers assume is free of cracks. We met at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue in Boulder. He was tall, a little awkward, with a smile that took up his whole face. I remember thinking his handshake was warm in a way that made you want to hold on a little longer. Our first date wasn't anything cinematic, just burgers at a small diner off Pearl Street, but that night he walked me to my car under a Colorado sky streaked with late summer stars and said, "I think we're going to have a lot of stories together." He was right. We married 3 years later in a small ceremony in Estes Park. The mountains framed every photo like a blessing, the air crisp with pine. Back then, my family's presence was patchy. My mom fussed over Mark's tie more than she looked at me, and my dad kept disappearing to take important calls. But I told myself not to read into it. This was my wedding day, after all. Daniel caught me glancing toward them during our first dance and whispered, "Focus on me. We can't change them, but we can build our own kind of family." And we did. Daniel was a mechanical engineer, the kind of person who could fix a leaky faucet with one hand while holding a mug of coffee in the other. I worked as a senior project manager for a renewable energy firm downtown. We bought a 2-story house in a quiet Denver suburb with a maple tree in the front yard and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon on Sunday mornings. Every spring, I planted rows of tomatoes in the garden out back. Daniel would tease that they were state fair winners if only I'd enter them. Thursday nights were for game nights with friends, Scrabble for me, poker for him. We traveled when we could, long weekends in Seattle, hiking trips in Utah, one unforgettable anniversary in Banff, where we woke to elk grazing just outside the lodge window. We were savers, planners, dreamers. We talked about starting a family soon, though we never rushed it. We even converted the upstairs office into a space that could easily become a nursery. Daniel painted the walls a warm ivory just in case. Our life was not perfect, but it was ours, and it was steady. That steadiness made the shift in late summer feel almost exciting instead of threatening. Daniel was offered an 8-month contract with an aerospace company in Sydney, Australia. The role was prestigious, the kind of leap that could push his career into entirely new territory. At first, I hesitated. 8 months felt like a long time. But Daniel framed it like an adventure we'd always remember, and the company offered to cover my flights if I wanted to visit mid-contract. We threw a small going-away dinner before his departure, grilled salmon, his favorite, with friends crowding the kitchen. My family stopped by briefly. Mark left early, claiming he had to prep for a client meeting. I brushed it off. I was used to them keeping our interactions short. The night before his flight, Daniel and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket. He promised the time would fly by. When I get back, he said we'll pick a date and start that next chapter. His fingers threaded through mine as if to anchor me to that vision. And for a while, it felt true. We video called every day in the first 2 months. I visited him in December, right before the holidays, and it was like a second honeymoon, Sydney's Harbour Lights dinners by the water, a day trip to the Blue Mountains. We even started talking seriously about when to start trying for a baby after his contract ended. Looking back, I can see how easy it is to believe that the future will arrive exactly as you've planned it. I can see how you trick yourself into thinking love is enough to shield you from what's coming. But back then, I didn't see it. I was still the woman who waved at her husband through an airport security gate and believed the hardest part would be missing him for a few months. I didn't know yet that a single phone call would break that belief into pieces I could never fit back together again. The call came on a Tuesday morning, and for the rest of my life, Tuesdays would feel different. I was in my Denver office halfway through a virtual meeting when my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. We always checked in early, my time late his before he went to bed. I muted my mic, smiled, and answered. His face filled the screen, but there was something in his eyes, a tension around his mouth. "Hey," he said, rubbing his temple. "I've had this pounding headache all day. Probably just stress, big project deadline this week." I offered the usual advice, water rest, maybe log off early, but he waved it off with a crooked smile. "Don't worry, I'll be fine. Just wanted to see your face before I crash." We talked for a few more minutes before he promised he'd call me tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. 8 hours later, my phone rang again. Same number, but the voice on the other end wasn't his. "Ms. Lawson, this is Henry. I work with Daniel. He collapsed during a meeting. They took him to Royal Prince Alfred Hospital." The room around me seemed to tilt. I grabbed my purse and keys without knowing why Denver to Sydney wasn't exactly a quick drive. "What happened? Is he—" "They said it's serious, a brain aneurysm. He's in surgery now." I booked the earliest flight I could find departure in less than 4 hours. I threw clothes into a suitcase, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't zip it. At the airport, I called my mother. "Daniel's in critical condition. I'm flying to Sydney." "Oh, Rachel," she said, her voice flat. "Do you have travel insurance?" That was it. "No, I'll come with you, no. I'm so sorry." Just a practical question, like we were talking about a delayed shipment instead of my husband's life. By the time I landed, 30 hours of stale air and recycled grief, Daniel was in a coma. The doctor's face was careful, professional. We performed emergency surgery, but the damage was severe. For 5 days, I sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand, talking to him, begging him to come back to me. I told him about the tomatoes just starting to sprout in the garden, about how the maple tree would be bare by the time he came home, about how we still had places to see. He never opened his eyes. On the 5th night, the machines around him beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. The nurse's voice was gentle but unshakable. "It's time." I signed the papers with a hand that didn't feel like mine. The next few days blurred into an endless checklist of impossible decisions: death certificates, hospital bills, cremation or burial. The cost to bring him home was astronomical, even after insurance. In the end, I chose a burial there in Sydney, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only option that wouldn't drain every cent we had. The funeral was small colleagues from his project team, a few neighbors from the flat he'd rented, and me. No family. I called home the night before, my voice shaking. "If there's any way you could be here." Mark said flights are too expensive, Rach, and I've got a big client presentation. Mom said, "You don't need us there for closure. Just get through it and come home." So I stood alone as they lowered my husband into the ground, a world away from everyone I loved. After the funeral, I returned to his empty apartment to pack his things. His running shoes were still by the door, laces tied neatly. His coffee mug was in the sink, a faint ring at the bottom. I wrapped each item carefully, as if the weight of my care could somehow make up for the absence of theirs. Grief in a foreign country is its own kind of isolation. Every errand was a puzzle of paperwork and unfamiliar rules. Every trip to a government office meant explaining again and again why I was there, my voice breaking over the same words. I thought the worst was behind me, that getting through those 5 days, that funeral, those endless forms, was the hardest thing I'd ever do. But the hardest thing was still waiting for me 30 hours and one family group chat away. I left Sydney with 3 suitcases, 1 with my clothes and 2 stuffed with pieces of Daniel's life. His favorite flannel shirt, the leather journal I'd given him on our 5th anniversary, the photo album from Banff, the coffee mug he used every morning. Each zipper felt heavier than the weight of fabric or paper. It was the weight of finality. The journey home was brutal. A 6-hour delay at Kingsford Smith Airport meant I missed my connection in Los Angeles. By the time I boarded my final flight to Denver, I'd been in transit for over 30 hours. My neck ached, my stomach was hollow, and my brain was buzzing from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Somewhere over Kansas, I decided to text my family my arrival time again, just in case. Landing at 5:07 p.m. could really use a ride. I imagined Mom replying, "We'll be there," or Mark saying, "On my way." The screen stayed silent. We touched down as the winter sun dipped low, casting the tarmac in shades of steel blue. I powered on my phone, and 2 notifications from the family chat popped up. "Mark, we're busy. Try Uber. Mom, why didn't you plan better?" It was like being shoved backward into cold water. My breath caught in my throat, not from surprise, but from the bitter confirmation of something I'd tried not to believe. Even now they wouldn't show up. I stared at those words as passengers around me unbuckled and reached for their bags. For a second, I considered replying, with anger laying bare everything I'd been holding back for years. Instead, I typed the same 2 words I'd been using my whole life to smooth over their neglect. No worries. But there were worries. Dragging my luggage through customs, I watched other travelers greet family with open arms. Kids squealed, grandparents cried, couples kissed like the world had stopped for them. I kept my eyes down and walked to the rideshare pickup area. The driver's name was Carl, a quiet man in his 50s. He didn't ask about my trip, and I didn't offer. The city lights blurred past the window, and I tried not to imagine what it would have felt like to pull into my driveway, with someone waiting there, someone who knew I was coming home, broken and needed to be held together. When we stopped in front of my house, the porch light was off. I remembered asking Mom 2 days ago to make sure the heat was on the fridge stocked, just so I wouldn't come home to an empty shell. My key turned stiffly in the lock. Inside, the air was stale and cold enough to see my breath. The refrigerator hummed faintly, holding nothing but expired condiments and a carton of milk that had soured into a solid lump. Mail spilled from the basket by the door untouched for weeks. Every promise they'd made to have things ready had been ignored. I set Daniel's suitcases gently by the couch and stood there for a moment staring at them. The house felt foreign, like I'd walked into a stranger's life. No warmth, no welcome, no trace of the man who used to fill this space with laughter. Upstairs, our bedroom looked the same as when I'd left. The bed was neatly made, the pillow on his side untouched. His slippers sat at the edge toes pointing toward the door like they'd been waiting. I thought about unpacking, but the idea of opening those suitcases, of releasing his scent into this frozen empty air, was more than I could bear. So I sat in the armchair by the window coat, still on staring at the maple tree in the front yard. The branches were bare, their shadows stretching across the snow like black veins. It was silent except for the occasional groan of the house settling in the cold. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something shift, not a snap, not yet, but a slow, steady tear in the fabric of my loyalty. I'd spent my entire life making excuses for them. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they don't realize. Maybe next time will be different. But as I sat there alone in the dark, the truth pressed in like the chill in my bones. There would never be a next time where they showed up because I needed them. If they couldn't come through now after everything, they never would. And I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. The next morning, I woke to an unfamiliar sound, a hollow gurgling, echoing from somewhere downstairs. For a moment, I thought it was just the old pipes rattling in protest at the cold. But when I swung my legs off the chair and felt the icy bite of water soaking through my socks, I knew it was something worse. The kitchen floor was under 3 inches of frigid water, reflecting the pale winter light like a shattered mirror. I traced the sound upward and saw a crack in the ceiling above the sink, a steady stream pouring through it. My breath fogged the air as I splashed to the utility closet, my fingers burning from the cold as I wrestled with the main shutoff valve. When the water finally slowed to a trickle, the damage was clear: buckled hardwood in the dining room, sagging drywall, and the ominous drip from a light fixture. A frozen pipe. The kind of thing that doesn't happen if someone keeps the heat on like they promised. I stood in the middle of that waterlogged room, phone in hand, debating who to call. I didn't have the energy for a fight, but I didn't have the luxury of pride either. Mark picked up on the fourth ring. "Hey, I can't talk long," he said. "Lisa and I are setting up for dinner with a couple of clients I've been courting for months." "The house is flooded," I said flatly. "Pipe burst. Plumber can't come until Tuesday. No heat water everywhere. I can't stay here." "That sucks," he said, like I'd just told him my team lost a football game. "Have you tried other plumbers? Maybe check Angie's List or—" "Mark," it cut in, my voice rising, "I just got back from burying my husband. I've been on planes for over a day. I'm standing in ankle-deep freezing water. I'm asking if I can stay with you until this gets sorted out." There was a pause long enough for me to hear voices and clinking glasses in the background. Tonight's really bad timing. Guest room's full of Lisa's craft stuff. "You should call Mom and Dad." So I did. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice bright in that false, too-high way she uses when she's already decided the answer is no. "Oh, honey. You know we'd normally say yes, but the bridge club is meeting here tomorrow and we've been cleaning all day. Your father's back is acting up. We just can't handle guests right now. What about a hotel? You've got insurance, don't you?" I hung up without answering. The cold was starting to sink into my bones. I dug through the cabinets and found half a sleeve of stale crackers, eating them mechanically while standing in the water. The power flickered once, then again. Outside, the wind howled as the storm the news had been warning about for days rolled in. I thought about all the times in my life I'd been told to be understanding, to let things go, to not make a scene. Sitting there with my toes numb and my breath clouding in my own kitchen, I realized those lessons had only ever served them, never me. If you've ever had to swallow your needs because you were afraid of being told you were too much, you know that bone-deep ache. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between asking for help and protecting yourself from more rejection? I want to know how you got through it. I tried to focus on practical steps: call more plumbers, see if any emergency crews were available, but my body was giving out. I hadn't eaten a real meal in over 24 hours, hadn't slept in a bed in days, and the house felt colder by the minute. The basement stairs were slick from the leak, but I went down anyway, thinking maybe I could get the furnace running in at least one part of the house. I didn't know it yet, but that decision was about to turn an already bad homecoming into a fight for my life. The basement smelled like damp concrete and old wood, that heavy clinging scent you get in spaces that haven't been aired out in months. I flicked on the light, but nothing happened, just darkness pressing in on the edges of my phone's flashlight beam. Water sloshed around my ankles as I made my way toward the electrical panel on the far wall. I kept thinking if I could just get the furnace going, I could buy myself enough warmth to survive the night. My fingers were stiff, but I reached for the metal panel door anyway. The instant my palm touched it, a violent jolt ripped up my arm. My body convulsed, the flashlight clattering to the floor with a splash, and then I was airborne, thrown backward into the darkness. When I hit the concrete, my head smacked against something hard. For a second, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no thought, just black. Then the world returned in fragments, the rush of blood in my ears, the throb in my arm, the sticky warmth trickling down the side of my face. I reached up and my fingers came away red. I tried to stand, but the room tilted wildly. My knees buckled and I caught myself against a support beam, breathing in short, ragged gasps. My mind kept telling me upstairs, upstairs, but my body moved like it belonged to someone else. Halfway up the stairs, I had to stop. My vision tunneled the edges, going soft and gray. By the time I stumbled into the living room, I was barely conscious. I collapsed onto the couch, shivering violently. My fingers were numb, my toes little more than blocks of ice at the end of my legs. Somewhere in the haze, a sound cut through the high-pitched beeping of the carbon monoxide detector. It took a moment for the meaning to register. The heating system must have been damaged, maybe from the burst pipe or the electrical issues. Now the air itself was turning toxic. The beeping grew louder, or maybe my head just pounded harder. My phone was on the coffee table, but it might as well have been miles away. My arm wouldn't lift, my legs wouldn't move. A strange calm slid over me, the kind that feels like surrender. I thought of Daniel, how his hand felt wrapped around mine, how he'd always been the one to make me believe we could handle anything. If this was how it ended, at least I'd see him again. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was a pounding at the front door and a woman's voice calling my name. Later, I would learn that Diane, my neighbor across the street, had seen water flowing out from under my front door and pooling down the porch steps. She'd tried calling me, then walked over when I didn't answer. The moment she heard the alarm inside, she dialed 911. Firefighters broke down the door and found me slumped on the couch, the house dangerously cold carbon monoxide levels spiking well above safety limits. The paramedics who carried me out said I was suffering from moderate hypothermia, carbon monoxide, poisoning, a concussion, and an electrical burn. Another few hours, and it wouldn't have been a rescue, it would have been a recovery. When I woke in the ER, the bright lights felt like knives in my eyes. A nurse was adjusting my oxygen mask, her voice steady but kind. "You're lucky your neighbor checked on you when she did." Lucky. That word sat heavy in my chest. I'd nearly died alone in my own home, and the only reason I was still breathing was because someone who wasn't even family had noticed something was wrong. If you've ever been pulled back from the edge by the kindness of someone who didn't have to care, you know it changes something deep inside you. It plants the question you can't ignore: who really shows up when it matters? I didn't know then that the answer to that question and the way it would play out was about to be broadcast far beyond my quiet Denver street. When I finally came fully to, I was in a hospital room, white walls, soft beeping from a monitor, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to the air. My head felt like it was wrapped in thick wool, but my mind started stitching together fragments: Diane's voice, the pounding at the door cold seeping into my bones, the shrill carbon monoxide alarm. A nurse named Sarah was at my bedside checking my vitals. She had the kind of voice that could coax truth out of anyone. "You gave us quite a scare," she said, adjusting the blanket around my shoulders. My throat was raw, but I managed to whisper. "What happened?" "You were found unresponsive in your home. Hypothermia, carbon monoxide, poisoning, concussion, electrical burn. You're lucky to be here." She hesitated, then added softly, "Your neighbor's the reason you're still alive." Her words sank in slowly. Diane, who I'd waved to maybe a dozen times since moving in, had seen the water, heard the alarm, and made the call that saved my life. Not my family. While I was lying on that couch slipping away, my phone sat untouched on the coffee table. The last messages in the family chat were still open. "We're busy. Try Uber. Why didn't you plan better?" There'd been no follow-up. No call. Not even a "did you make it home?" I closed my eyes, partly because the light hurt, partly because I didn't want the tears to come just yet. What I didn't know was that the story had already started to ripple far beyond this room. A local reporter named Michael Chen had been at the hospital covering storm-related injuries. He overheard one of the paramedics talking about the widow who nearly froze to death after burying her husband overseas. Michael spoke to Diane first, who described seeing me arrive home alone in a rideshare the day before, looking like I'd been through hell. She told him she'd meant to check on me earlier but had gotten busy preparing for the storm. Her guilt was evident, but so was her care. Then Michael talked to the paramedics. One of them mentioned, without naming names, the family group chat still open on my phone when they found me. The contrast between my request for a ride and the responses dismissing detached was too stark to ignore. By the 6 o'clock news, the headline read, "Local woman returns from husband's overseas funeral, nearly dies in home disaster after family refuses to help." Social media took it from there. Screenshots of the messages, blurred names, but recognizable enough to those who knew us, started circulating in community groups. Comments piled up, some furious, others sharing their own stories of being abandoned when they needed help most. The hashtag #TryUber began trending locally, a bitter shorthand for neglect. I learned all this later from Sarah, who came back into my room after her shift change with an apologetic look. "Just so you're not blindsided," she said, "your situation's on the news. People are reacting." Reacting was an understatement. By that evening, offers of help were pouring in from strangers. A plumbing company volunteered to repair the damage to my home at no cost. A local restoration service offered to handle the water damage and check the wiring. A hotel downtown offered me a suite free of charge until my house was safe. It was overwhelming, humbling, and in a way devastating, because the kindness flooding in from strangers only threw my family's absence into sharper relief. If you've ever had strangers step in to fill a role your own family wouldn't or couldn't, you'll understand that dizzying mix of gratitude and grief. It's like finding water in the desert and realizing the people who left you there were carrying full canteens the whole time. And I want to ask you if you've ever had someone unexpected save you. When the ones you counted on stayed silent, tell me about it. Share it in the comments. Because those are the stories that remind the rest of us we're not as alone as we think. I didn't know yet, but before the night was over, my family would walk into this hospital room, not with flowers, not with apologies, but with a mission to save their image. And that was the moment everything between us began to truly break. I heard them before I saw them, the sharp click of my mother's heels on the linoleum, my brother Mark's low murmur, the squeak of the door as it swung open. The air in the room seemed to shift heavy with tension I could feel, even before I looked up. Rachel, my mother, said, her voice stretched tight, almost brittle. We came as soon as we heard. I almost laughed. As soon as you heard the news had been running for hours, they'd had my number the whole time. The last I checked, hearing didn't require a trending hashtag and a reporter outside the hospital. Mark stepped forward, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. Look, we need to get ahead of this. That reporter twisted everything. People think we abandoned you. I blinked at him. Didn't you? His eyes flicked to the side like he couldn't hold my gaze. My mother jumped in, her tone suddenly softer the way she spoke when she wanted something. It's not about that right now. It's about the family's reputation. Your uncle's already called, people are asking questions. I stared at them, the absurdity pressing down on me. I was lying in a hospital bed, bandaged, bruised, and still reeking faintly of smoke and damp clothes, and their opening move was damage control. Not, are you okay? Not, we're sorry. Just protect the brand. Rachel, my mother said, leaning closer, if a reporter calls, just say it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we couldn't get to you because of the storm. That you're grateful for everyone's help and you don't want any trouble. I felt something shift inside me, then not anger, not yet. More like a deep, icy clarity. This was who they were, who they'd always been. My needs would never outweigh their image. I'm not lying for you, I said, my voice steady, despite the pounding in my head. Her expression hardened, a tiny crack in the polished mask. This could make things very difficult for us, Rachel. For all of us. I held her gaze. No, just for you. The silence that followed was so sharp it could cut. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. You don't get it, he muttered. Once people see you as some poor, helpless victim, they'll never respect you again. You'll be the charity case. I almost smiled. I'd rather be a charity case than the kind of person who ignores a grieving sister because dinner plans are more important. That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the flicker of heat in his eyes. My mother straightened, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her coat. We'll talk later, she said, her voice clipped, and they turned to leave. When the door closed behind them, I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. Because in that moment, I stopped waiting for them to be anything other than what they were. I stopped hoping they'd wake up one day and realize the damage they'd done. The nurse Sarah came in a few minutes later with my dinner tray. She must have sensed the tension lingering in the air. Everything okay? She asked gently. I hesitated, then nodded. Everything's clear. She smiled faintly, like she understood more than I'd said. Sometimes clarity is the best medicine. That night, I lay awake in the hospital bed, watching the lights of the city outside my window. Messages kept pouring into my phone, strangers offering help, sharing their own stories, telling me I wasn't alone. Every ping felt like a small lifeline, a thread tying me to something bigger than my little fractured family. And I realized something the world already knew: the truth. I didn't have to fight to convince anyone. The facts spoke louder than any spin my mother or brother could manage. Still, I had no idea how far they'd go to fix the story. No idea that in just a few days they'd pull a stunt so reckless, so desperate it would backfire in a way none of us could come back from. If you think their visit to my hospital room was cold, wait until you hear what they did next. That was the moment I learned that when some people feel cornered, they don't apologize, they attack. And they were about to aim straight for me. 3 days after they left my hospital room, I was discharged. Sarah, the nurse, helped me into the thick winter coat a volunteer had brought in, warning me the temperature had dropped even further. My home repairs were still underway, so I checked into the downtown hotel that had offered me a temporary suite. The first night there, I finally felt a sliver of peace. The room was warm, the bed impossibly soft, and for the first time in weeks I slept without waking from the sound of my own sobs. But peace didn't last. The next morning my phone buzzed, non-stop texts, calls, and notifications all at once. At first I thought it was more strangers offering help, but when I opened the first message from Diane, my stomach dropped. "Rachel, you need to see this. It's everywhere." Attached was a screenshot of a post on Facebook from my mother's account. It read, "Sometimes the media gets it wrong. We would never abandon family. We were in constant contact with Rachel during the storm, but she refused our help. We love her and hope she recovers soon." Underneath were dozens of comments from her friends defending her, calling me ungrateful, selfish, and my favorite, a drama queen seeking attention. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. They weren't just protecting their image, they were rewriting the story entirely, painting me as the one who'd turned them away. The worst part, they'd attached a blurry photo of me in the hospital bed, clearly taken without my permission. The caption, "She knows the truth." By noon, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Strangers I'd never met were telling me to stop embarrassing your family and be an adult. The comments burned hotter than the fever I'd battled days earlier. I called Mark. He answered on the second ring, sounding annoyed. "What?" "Take it down," I said, my voice shaking. "You know it's a lie." "It's damage control," he replied flatly. "You made this public. We're just setting the record straight." "Straight?" I nearly laughed. "You left me to die, Mark. And now you're calling me a liar." He sighed as if I were the one exhausting him. "You should have handled this privately. Now it's a mess for all of us." "Just drop it, Rachel. People will forget in a week." But I knew they wouldn't, not because of me, but because my mother wouldn't let them. That night, a reporter from the local news station called. "Rachel, we've seen your family's statement," she said gently. "We'd like to give you a chance to respond." I hesitated. My instinct was to stay quiet, avoid more drama. But then I remembered lying on that couch, cold creeping into my bones, my phone lighting up with messages telling me to find an Uber. So I said yes. The interview aired the next evening. I didn't cry, didn't shout. I just told the truth. I described coming home from my husband's funeral, reaching out for help, and being told everyone was too busy. I explained how Diane had found me and how strangers had stepped up when my own blood hadn't. The segment ended with the reporter asking if I forgave my family. I looked straight into the camera and said, "I don't hold grudges. But forgiveness isn't the same as letting people keep hurting you." By morning, the clip had gone viral. Not just locally, national outlets picked it up. The hashtag #TryUber was suddenly everywhere. My mother's Facebook post vanished, but the screenshots lived on. And that's when the phone calls from my family stopped entirely. No more texts, no more damage control, just silence. It should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like the beginning of something bigger. I wasn't just fighting for my version of the story anymore. I was fighting for my right to exist without their constant rewriting of my life. I didn't know yet that their next move wouldn't be online. It would be face to face. And it would be the kind of confrontation you can't walk away from unchanged. The knock came 3 nights later, just as I was finishing a late dinner in my hotel room. I wasn't expecting anyone, most people texted first. But the sound was sharp, urgent, the kind that made your stomach twist before your brain caught up. When I opened the door, my mother was standing there in a long camel coat, her hair pulled back in that flawless bun she wore for church and charity luncheons. Beside her was Mark, hands shoved into his pockets, his jaw set like stone. "Rachel," she said, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. The faint scent of her perfume filled the room, cloying and familiar. "We need to talk." I closed the door slowly, bracing myself. "About what? The part where you lied on Facebook or the part where you sent strangers after me?" She ignored the jab, settling into the armchair like it was her throne. Mark remained standing, pacing near the window. "This has gone far enough," she said. "You've made the family look like monsters. That video was the truth," I cut in. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Your truth, maybe. But the internet doesn't care about facts. It cares about spectacle. And you've given them plenty." Mark stopped pacing. "You've ruined our reputations. Do you even realize what this is doing to Dad's business, to my job?" I laughed, short, humorless. "Oh, So now my comfort, my safety, my dignity, all of that is less important than your LinkedIn profiles. You're twisting this, Mark snapped. We're here to make peace. Peace? I shook my head. You're here because you lost control of the narrative. The room went quiet for a moment, the tension so thick it felt like it might choke me. My mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to a calm, deliberate tone, the one she used when she wanted to corner someone. If you take down the interviews, stop talking to the press, and post a statement that this was all a misunderstanding, we can move on from this. We'll even help you financially until you get back on your feet. There it was, a bribe dressed as a lifeline. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. You think you can buy my silence? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I think you'd rather not spend the next year being known as the woman who destroyed her own family. Something inside me hardened. I'd rather be known as the woman who told the truth. Mark's voice rose, frustration cracking through his controlled facade. You're impossible! We're offering you an out and you're too stubborn to take it. Do you think these internet strangers will still care about you in 6 months? In a year? I stepped closer to him, my voice steady. Maybe not, but I will still care about me, and that's more than I can say for you. My mother stood abruptly, smoothing her coat. You're making a mistake. Maybe I said, opening the door, but at least it'll be mine. They walked out without another word, the hallway swallowing them in silence. I stood there for a long moment after the door closed, my pulse racing, my hands trembling not from fear, but from the sheer release of refusing to bend. When I finally sat back down, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a DM from a woman I didn't know. I saw your interview. Your story is mine too. You're not alone. I stared at the message, my chest tight. For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than the pain they'd left me with. I felt connected to strangers, to survivors, to anyone who had ever been told to swallow the truth for someone else's comfort. And I knew then that I couldn't go back. Not to them, not to pretending, not to the version of myself who stayed quiet. They thought this was about a single storm, a single night. But this had been building my entire life, and the next time they came for me, I would be ready. Because peace wasn't something they could give me anymore. It was something I would make for myself, no matter what it cost. The morning after that confrontation, I woke up with the kind of clarity that feels like a new season cracking open. Sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains, pooling on the carpet, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the weight of dread pressing on my chest. I knew what I had to do, not just to protect myself from them, but to ensure their version of the story never eclipsed the truth again. I made coffee, sat down with my laptop, and started compiling everything. Every text, every call log, every photo from that night in the storm. The messages where I begged for help, the ones where they told me to find an Uber, the silence in between. I even dug out the voicemail from my brother 2 days later where he said almost cheerfully, "Glad you're alive. Guess the storm wasn't that bad, huh?" It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about record. I had spent too many years letting them gaslight me into believing my pain was an exaggeration. This time I would build something they couldn't twist. By noon I had sent a secured folder to Diane asking her to keep it safe in case anything happened. She called me 10 minutes later, her voice tight with concern. "Rachel, you're scaring me." "I'm not planning anything reckless," I reassured her. "I'm planning something permanent." That afternoon, I took a cab to meet a woman named Carla, a legal advocate for survivors of family abuse, not just physical, but emotional and financial. She had reached out after seeing my interview, saying she believed there was a larger case here. Sitting in her office, I laid everything out. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You know, if this goes forward, they'll try to destroy you. They'll call you unstable. They'll drag up every mistake you've ever made." I nodded. "They already do that. The only difference is, now I won't be silent while it happens." Carla smiled faintly. "Then we'll start with a protective order, and we'll look into defamation, especially since they used your image without consent. We'll move carefully, but we'll move." Walking out of her office, I felt an odd mix of fear and relief. Fear of what was coming, but relief that I finally had someone in my corner who wasn't related to me, didn't owe them loyalty, and wouldn't flinch at the ugliness. That night, I posted on my own social media, not about the legal steps, but about the bigger truth. I wrote about how family isn't defined by shared blood, but by consistent care. About how silence doesn't heal wounds, it just buries them deeper. About how love without respect isn't love at all. The post exploded. Thousands of shares messages from people telling me they'd been through the same thing. Some were still stuck in it, whispering from inside the storm. Others had broken free and were building lives that looked nothing like the ones they were born into. Every single story reminded me why I couldn't back down. 2 days later, a letter arrived at the hotel. No return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "We are done with you. Don't come to the house. Don't call. You've made your choice, now live with it." For a moment, I just stared at it, feeling that familiar ache rise in my throat. But then, unexpectedly, a calm washed over me. They thought this was punishment. They didn't realize it was the freedom I had been afraid to claim. I folded the letter, slid it into the same folder as the evidence, and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not as something to mourn, but as a marker proof that the chapter where they dictated my worth was officially over. And as I lay in bed that night, I knew the next step wasn't about them at all. It was about me and the life I could finally build without asking their permission. If they thought they'd silenced me, they hadn't been listening. My voice was just getting started. The following week, I packed my few belongings from the hotel and moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't glamorous peeling paint near the window frame, a leaky faucet in the kitchen, but it was mine. No one had a key but me. No one could show up unannounced and stand in my living room like they owned it. The first night there, I ordered takeout, sat on the floor with my dinner spread out on a cardboard box, and let the quiet settle in. No yelling from the hallway, no phone buzzing with guilt-laden texts, no footsteps that made me brace for confrontation. Just silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty but safe. Still, the legal process moved forward in the background. Carla called regularly, updating me on the filings. The protective order went through faster than expected, largely because the documented harassment was so blatant. She also began preparing the defamation case, gathering witness statements from people who had seen my family's public posts and private messages. I'd be lying if I said it didn't take a toll. Every time I had to reread those messages or watch that video from the storm night, my chest tightened. But each time I did, it became a little less paralyzing. Like I was reprogramming my own mind, teaching it that the truth wasn't something to fear. One afternoon, Diane stopped by with a potted plant and a bag of groceries. She set them on the counter and said, "You're starting over, so you need something alive in here. Preferably something you can't kill." I laughed for the first time in days. We sat at my small kitchen table sipping tea when she leaned forward and said, "You know, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. They're not used to losing control of you." I nodded. "I've thought about that. But I'm not doing this to win against them. I'm doing it so I never have to live in fear of them again." Later that week, I got an email from a journalist who'd covered my first interview. She was working on a larger feature about family estrangement and wanted to include my ongoing story. Part of me hesitated. More exposure meant more backlash, but another part knew that visibility was my armor. The more people who knew the truth, the harder it would be for them to rewrite it. We met at a cafe downtown. I told her about the legal steps, the protective order, the way strangers had shared their own stories with me. She listened carefully, then asked, "Do you feel free yet?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about my little apartment, the folder of evidence, the potted plant on the counter. Not completely, I admitted, but I feel like I'm finally walking toward it. The article went live 2 weeks later. It was raw, unflinching, and it resonated far beyond what I'd imagined. My inbox flooded again, not just with survivor stories, but with offers to collaborate on advocacy projects, podcasts, even a book deal. Of course, my family saw it too. The night after the article dropped, I got a text from an unknown number. "You're dead to us." I deleted it without replying. The words didn't land the way they used to. Dead to them simply meant alive to myself. One evening, as I was sorting through my mail, I found a card from a woman in another state. She wrote that my story had given her the courage to leave an abusive household after 20 years. She ended with, "You don't know me, but you saved me." I sat there for a long time holding that card, realizing that all the pain, the public exposure, the risk, it had already mattered to someone. And maybe that was the point all along. For the first time, the idea of family didn't feel like a wound. It felt like something I could redefine piece by piece with people who chose to show up not out of obligation, but out of love. And in that moment, I understood freedom wasn't a single act or legal win. It was the quiet, steady rebuilding of a life they could never touch again. Spring came quietly, softening the edges of winter in my little apartment. Mornings were brighter now, the air warmer, and I found myself opening the windows just to let the world in. It was strange after years of being on alert. I was learning what it felt like to simply exist without bracing for the next blow. The legal case was gaining traction. Carla called one Thursday afternoon with news they've responded to the defamation claim. They're denying everything, of course, but we've got their public posts archived. They've already contradicted themselves twice. I smiled faintly. So the lies are catching up to them. Exactly, she said. But this also means they might try to settle quietly to avoid a trial. The thought of settlement was tempting. It would be faster, less draining, but I wasn't ready to trade truth for convenience. Let's see how far they're willing to go, I told her. I've lived with their version of the story for too long. Outside of the legal fight, life was slowly expanding again. I started taking evening walks through the neighborhood, rediscovering the joy of small routines. I'd pass the same corner cafe every night until one evening I finally stepped in. The barista, a tall man with an easy smile named Mark, remembered my order the second time I came in. One night he asked casually, "So you new to the area?" "Sort of," I said, swirling my tea. "I'm starting over." He nodded like he understood more than I'd said out loud. "Best way to start over is to find your spots, places that feel like yours." That became one of them. Soon the cafe wasn't just where I got tea. It was where I wrote in my journal, answered emails from survivors, and let myself imagine what a future could look like without the constant shadow of my family's control. But the shadow didn't disappear entirely. One evening, as I returned from the cafe, I noticed a car idling near my building. My stomach tightened when I recognized the dent in the rear bumper. It was my brother's. I didn't approach. Instead, I went inside, locked the door, and texted Carla. "He's here." Not directly threatening, but it feels intentional. She replied within minutes. "Document it. Call the police if he approaches." The car was gone the next morning, but the message was clear. They weren't above intimidation. Still, it didn't undo me the way it once would have. I took photos, made notes, and stored them in the same folder with everything else. This was evidence now, not fear. A week later, Carla confirmed the protective order had been formally extended. "They can't come within 200 yards of you without consequences," she said. "And if they try, we'll use it to strengthen the case." The more I leaned into documenting and protecting myself, the less their tactics worked. I wasn't the same person they could rattle with a cutting remark or a guilt-trip phone call. Every new boundary was like laying another brick in a wall they couldn't climb. Then came an unexpected moment of validation. The journalist who had written the earlier feature invited me to speak at a local panel about breaking cycles of family abuse. The thought of standing in front of strangers and speaking my truth was terrifying, but also thrilling. When the day came, I walked onto that small stage in a community center, the room filled with folding chairs and warm light. I told my story, not the watered-down version, but the whole truth. About the storm night, about the years of erasure and gaslighting, about the moment I realized silence was just another form of captivity. When I finished, there was a long, still pause. Then applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that feels like it's carrying you forward. Afterward, people lined up to thank me, to hug me, to tell me they saw themselves in my words. Walking home that night, I realized something. The life I was building wasn't just about escape. It was about creation, about building something new rooted in truth, safety, and chosen connection. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving without them. I was living entirely on my own terms. By early summer, the world outside was alive with color trees, full sidewalks warm under the sun, and my apartment finally looked like someone lived there. The potted plant from Diane had somehow survived my questionable watering habits, and a few framed photos now hung on the walls, moments with friends, snapshots from my walks, little pieces of a life I was building from the ground up. Carla called one Monday with an update that stopped me mid-sip of coffee. "They've just filed a motion to dismiss the defamation suit," she said, "claiming your story is a fabrication." I laughed, short, sharp, humorless. "Do they realize half of their own posts are still public?" "That's why I'm not worried," Carla replied. "But we'll need you to testify. Are you ready for that?" Was I? The thought of seeing them in a courtroom sitting just a few feet away made my stomach clench. But the idea of backing down after coming this far was worse. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." In the weeks that followed, Carla and I met often. We reviewed screenshots, timestamps, witness statements. Every document felt like a small weight lifted from my chest, proof that I hadn't imagined the cruelty, that my reality was valid. Outside the legal prep, life kept moving. The cafe had become my second home, and Mark and I often talked after closing. One night, as I helped him stack chairs, he asked, "Do you ever think about what you'll do when this is over?" I hesitated. Sometimes. I want peace, I guess. And maybe to help other people who've been through something like this. He nodded. "You'd be good at that. You speak in a way that makes people feel like they're not alone." The words stayed with me. For so long my voice had been drowned out or dismissed. Now strangers were telling me it mattered. The court date came quicker than I expected. That morning I stood in front of the mirror, steadying my breath. I didn't choose an aggressive outfit or a timid one, just something that made me feel like myself. Neutral tones, clean lines, hair pulled back. Armor in the form of authenticity. When I walked into the courtroom, they were already there. My parents, my brother, sitting in a tight cluster, avoiding my eyes. I took my seat beside Carla, feeling the air between us, heavy with unspoken history. The questioning began. Carla guided me through the timeline, letting me tell the story in my own words. My hands shook at first, but the more I spoke, the steadier I became. When their attorney tried to twist my answers, I didn't falter. I'd lived these moments. I knew the truth better than anyone. Then came the cross-examination. My mother's lawyer leaned in, voice dripping with insinuation. "Isn't it possible you're exaggerating for attention?" I looked directly at him. If attention was what I wanted, I would have told this story years ago. I stayed silent because I was afraid of exactly this, being called a liar for telling the truth. A hush settled over the room. When it was over, I stepped down from the stand feeling lighter even before a verdict was given. I had faced them without folding. That in itself was a win. 2 weeks later, the judge dismissed their motion to throw out the case. We were moving forward. Carla said their next step might be to offer a settlement. That night, I sat by my window, the city buzzing quietly below. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing my safety depended on keeping the peace, on keeping quiet. Now I understood something much deeper. Peace built on silence is just a prettier kind of prison, and I wasn't interested in prisons anymore. The fight wasn't over, but I knew without question that the person walking into that courtroom months from now would be even stronger than the one who'd stood there today. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to claim. The offer came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Carla called her tone calm but edged with something I couldn't place. "They're willing to settle," she said. "A public retraction, removal of all defamatory posts, and a financial compensation figure that, honestly, is substantial." For a moment, I just sat there staring at the raindrops sliding down my window. A part of me wanted to take it close, the bookend the fight. But another part bristled. "Do they admit fault?" I asked. Carla hesitated. Not explicitly. The retraction would be worded carefully. Enough for the public to see, but they won't use the words you deserve to hear. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about all the years of gaslighting, the countless times they'd rewritten history to make me the villain. Was money and a carefully polished statement really the justice I wanted? "No," I said finally. "Not unless it's the truth in plain words. I don't want them to get away with another half story." Carla didn't argue. Then we prepare for trial. The months that followed were a strange mix of tension and growth. I spent mornings reviewing documents with Carla, afternoons volunteering at a local shelter for women leaving abusive households. It started small, sorting donations, cleaning, but soon I found myself sitting in on support groups, listening to stories that echoed parts of my own. One woman, Mariah, told me I thought I'd never get out, but the moment I realized I could choose myself, everything shifted. Her words stayed with me, weaving into my own story. Choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was survival, and it was the foundation for every future choice I'd make. When trial day arrived, the courtroom felt both familiar and surreal. This time, I didn't just walk in as someone defending against lies. I walked in as someone ready to demand truth. Carla delivered her opening statement with precision, laying out the timeline, the evidence, the harm done. Their attorney tried to paint me as bitter, as attention-seeking, but the contradictions in their own words became clearer with every cross-examination. Then came a moment I hadn't anticipated. My father was on the stand, questioned about a public post where he'd called me unstable and dangerous. He shifted uncomfortably. It was a moment of frustration. Carla pressed. A moment of frustration that stayed online for 9 months. The silence in the room was heavy. My father looked toward my mother, then back at Carla. I regret it, he muttered, but it was too late. The damage and the truth were both undeniable. The trial lasted 4 days. On the final afternoon, the judge ruled in my favor full removal of all defamatory content, a written apology, signed by each of them, and damages awarded. But more than that, the judgment acknowledged the pattern of abuse and gaslighting for what it was. When I stepped outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter, sharper. Mark was waiting across the street with 2 cups of tea. I took mine smiling. So he asked, "What now?" I thought about it. For years, my life had been defined by what I was running from. Now, it could be defined by what I was building. I think I said slowly, "I'm going to keep telling my story." Not because of them, because someone else out there needs to know they can make it out too. That evening, I sat at my desk and began drafting the outline for a book not just about the trial, but about the quiet, brutal ways control hides in families, and the small, stubborn acts that break it. The fight had ended, but the lesson would carry me forward. You can't force people to tell the truth about you, but you can live a life so honest, so wholly your own that their lies no longer matter. And for the first time, I truly believed I was free. The days after the trial felt strangely quiet, as if the world had exhaled alongside me. For the first time in years, I woke up without a knot of dread in my stomach. The morning light spilling through my window didn't feel like a countdown to another battle. It felt like an invitation. I began to reclaim small things first. Morning walks without checking my phone for hostile messages. Cooking meals for myself just because I wanted to, not because I had to prove anything. Meeting friends without glancing over my shoulder, wondering if someone might be watching. One evening, I sat by the river, the water catching the soft gold of sunset. A breeze carried the scent of summer flowers, and for a moment I closed my eyes and let the stillness soak in. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting or pretending the past never happened. It was about letting the past take its place behind me, no longer steering the direction of my life. I thought of the people who had stood by me, Carla, Mark, the women at the shelter, and how their belief in me had been the scaffolding I needed to rebuild. And I thought of others still trapped in silence, waiting for the day they could choose themselves too. Maybe my story wasn't just mine anymore. Maybe it was a small light in someone else's darkness. And as I stood to leave the river whispering at my side, I knew this was only the beginning of a life I finally felt worthy of living.